Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. I'm going to talk a little bit about not capitalist transhumanism or my experience with capitalist transhumanist organizations. That's a conversation for another day. But rather a quick breakdown of the major techno-optimist and AI singularity and other singularitarian theories and movements, and the ways that they are problematic from the perspective of the cybernetic socialist insurrectionist, these things should not be viewed as things contributing to the building of a humane and sustainable world. I'm generally very critical of any strain of anti-communism. Anything that could be perceived as a imperial intelligence agency talking point, any movements that really deviate too much from the goals of scientific socialists, which are very straightforward: building a humane and sustainable economic system, ending the exploitation of man by man, which requires a hardline anti-imperial position, really first and foremost. But when you emphasize this to counter the CIA talking point, so to speak, you run the risk of maybe not emphasizing something that is also important there, which is the need for, I described, cybernetic socialist insurrectionist, as opposed to the revolutionary cybernetic socialist. Those ideas would be interchangeable, except, of course, revolution is kind of a weasel word. Insurrection is very clear what you're going to have to do, and that is a necessity. You shouldn't, in my view, be wasting very much time at all on websites like Twitter, Facebook, or other places talking to people. Your comrades are not your buddies that you're making jokes with. You should be organizing into affinity groups of an insurrectionist kind, because, as I've said many, many times, we have less than 5 years before we reach runaway overheating caused by capitalism's climate apocalypse, at which point, in the years to follow, humanity will suffer multi-billion person loss of life, which will begin and predominantly affect the global south, but also may well lead to total human extinction, including the people who think that they're going to escape by virtue of being wealthy or privileged or situated geographically in a way that would be less affected. So if your idea is protest or resistance or non-participation in this Western system, what you basically have is a situation where you feel good about yourself and make jokes with your buddy comrades for another 5 years, until such time as you, after 5 years, when you realize that you now live in Mad Max world, and you completely wasted your life. So the exigency of building an insurrectionist movement that challenges this ecocidal hegemon cannot be overstated. If you go by the tendencies, unfortunately, of scientific socialists, you do have something more reformist relative to that. And in criticizing the CIA talking point, an anti-communist talking point. I would be remiss if I didn't point all of this out at the same time, and I don't do that nearly enough, and I should. But back to this overview of tech-focused of movements and theories, and a critique of them from the point of view of the cybernetic socialist insurrectionist. The technological singularity is described as a point in time where artificial intelligence or highly advanced computing paradigms allow for surpassing human intelligence, and thus created a dizzying array of effects influencing society. I think that speaking in this language, rather than contextualizing this as a more earthbound AI takeoff that we can operate within and work and use to build a better world, is itself one of these intelligence agency talking points, because it centers an external locus of control, and it kind of pushes you to believe that this is something that those friends of the intelligence agency will be using and you will not be using, which I think, if anything, the opposite probably will tend to be true to a high degree, and these people are quite invested in making sure that these friends of empire are able to control these products and outcomes. And hopefully they will not be able to, but they are winning at this time. So some singularity theories, such as they are, this rapid technological advancement stemming from an intelligence explosion that I described as the technological singularity. A similar concept there is something that's described as an omega point, which is a concept of ultimate intelligence or consciousness, and the uniting of humankind into a global brain, something along those lines, an idea which I find quite titillating as a hive mind collectivist. But again, most of the people who discuss these things are we still online? Most of the people who discuss these things are discussing them in terms of upholding a neoliberal agenda, a far-right capitalist agenda protecting finance capital, and these outcomes deriving from finance capital, which is an utter absurdity. The finance capital is the thing that's causing capitalism's climate apocalypse. It's without private wealth and finance capital, there would not be capitalism's climate apocalypse, and only by defying the operations of finance capital can we stop capitalism's climate apocalypse, and that comes down to three pretty specific types of actions. The abolition of the United States military-industrial complex, $1 trillion a year super polluter, the world's worst polluter, whose only real job on the world stage is to protect other super polluters, creating an inescapable regime of super pollution, which most of these public-facing technologists, tech pros, techno-optimists, the tech-focused of the West are consciously and actively upholding that ecocidal system. We have to abolish the military-industrial complex. Not unrelated is the fossil fuel industries, and all fossil fuel sectors have to be basically wholly dismantled. We don't want to see human extinction, that is, at least up to the point where the dismantling of those would not cause supply chain collapses and problems of that kind, which would be still about 99% dismantling that could occur. The third worst offender sector that has to be abolished is animal products, livestock systems, which which is now well understood by climate scientists to be a close second in overall impact, or third, if by this metric, after fossil fuel products. And it's the one thing that you can do is removing animal products from your usage and diet. So one thing, most effective thing that you can do, short of insurrectionist things in terms of lifestyle considerations, to lessen this impact. And the fact that most socialists push back at this idea when the products, the facsimiles that would replace those animal products, taste the same. You can get a cheeseburger, tastes exactly like the cheeseburger that you're eating, but it's made from plant-based products, so it's a tiny amount of water usage and environmental impact by comparison. The fact that people push back from this is quite reprehensible, really. When you strip away kind of the cultural bullshit and double talk from that, what you're left with is people who are consciously upholding this ecocidal hegemon rather than supporting alternatives to it. So you will really not find Westerners who are not to some degree actively complicit. And when you engage with this kind of apologism for the omnicide in the ways that I've described, what you're doing is you're positioning yourself to be ineffective in these other areas. How could you possibly be a person who would participate in an insurrection to end the omnicide when you're not even willing to change your lifestyle in small ways to end the omnicide? And it's the philosophical, the ideological implications are similar. It's fruit from a poison tree. You have to make your thinking uniformly anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. That includes not making excuses for some particular sector of capitalism that you happen to still like. So this omega point concept is appealing, but it's really, again, not possible without embracing quite radically different worldviews than the people who tend to talk about this will actually be representing. I made a graphic that describes a broad range of ideas across the political compass. There's red, blue, yellow, and green on the political compass diagram, and way up here at the point where beyond people who are the most collective-minded scientific socialists, above them are the people who can't quite exist yet, hive mind collectivists, people who would, for example, use neural-lace technology to create use technologically mediated telepathy to create a collective endeavor that could not possibly exist by the present technology, but maybe not far off on the horizon. So those kinds of people who would support doing that sort of thing, those would be the people who would be real transhumanists, right? Hive mind collectivists. Those are the people, but the actual people who self-identify as transhumanists are way, way down here at the bottom of the political compass with rightists, pieces of shit like Trump, almost all of them, right? So how could these people who are more conservative than the world average, these Westerners, by a country mile more conservative, possibly be people who would build something like an omega point, a joining of consciousness, a type phenomena? It's absurd. These people are ridiculous. A similar concept to singularity, which is less confusing, is an intelligence explosion, similar to the AI takeoff terminology, but it's still describing exponential or rapidly quickening and substantial growth in advanced computing capabilities after a certain tipping point, which that tipping point may well be occurring in the year 2027. not 2127, 2027. And most of you are not talking as scientific socialists in terms of harnessing these outcomes to build a sustainable world. By and large, nor if you were the kind of insurrectionist who dislikes advanced technology, and you say, Ben, I'm a scientific socialist insurrectionist, but all of this stuff about technology is garbage, and I hate you. I would say, well, you're still a damn sight better than almost anyone. You're willing to do what's necessary to stop the omnicide. So the fact that you would disagree with me on this is fine. I would say thank you, sir. May I have another? But by and large, the people that you encounter who are critical of this sort of thing are people who are using that as a pretext to maintain a status quo. Almost everybody, every hipster jackass on Twitter or Facebook, who, when they see some action being taken, probably not an insurrectionist one, but nevertheless some action being taken, and they say this is not the way. People like to say this, I guess in reference to a television show, The Mandalorian. This is not the way. Right. Almost everyone who's ever said these words in response to something that they've witnessed, this is not the way, is just kind of adopting a status quo position without wanting to seem like they're doing that. So don't say that. Maybe try and say yes, and let's do the insurrectionist thing. Let's build upon this to do the insurrectionist thing, or something more along those lines. The AI singularity movements, I've described transhumanism and singularitarianism as these adherents to trying to adapt to an AI takeoff. Again, they're overwhelmingly capitalist, so they're doing no such thing. This is well in evidence. You say, "Oh, Ben, this transformation, how could it possibly not be good for humankind? This great proliferation of intelligence, automated intelligence." It's the capitalist singularitarian is a mountebank, just a carnival barker, because automation, full automation, quite nearly full automation, has affected many sectors across the course of the 20th century and into the 21st century. For example, farming. Farming is not just, you don't just have Farmer John like farting around in his farm. That's not really how farming's done anymore. It's a full automation process. But it's a full automation process in the West, and this Western dominated world, where these things are controlled and operated by financial capital for profit mechanisms. So you have, compare that to the people who, say, in North America used to do a lot of the farming. The archetypal worker, if people were being more honest, which is the chattel slave. You say, how is a chattel slave the archetypal worker? Well, by Marxist theories, the dominant theory is a labor theory of value, which describes, among other things, the idea that work capitalists only profit by stolen labor, and the degree to which that labor is stolen is the degree to which the capitalist profits. So the person who has all of their labor stolen and is thus then the most essential worker by this kind of thinking, or the truest kind of worker in a certain light by this kind of thinking. But this is generally disregarded, just as the fate of African descended people or native people is generally thought of as outside of worker movements. This is a form of white supremacist social chauvinism that is near ubiquitous in the United States. But this full automation across many sectors, so if this were benefiting, if full automation were benefiting workers in any way, those descendant of Africans descended of slaves, or those descended of sharecroppers more recently, those people who did the lion's share of the work of building the United States industrial power generally, and particularly as it relates to food, would be the ones who benefited the most by this full automation. But instead it was basically given to European supremacists, stolen from them, and turned into a full automation thing. And these people don't even get the booby prize of having their rights protected, say having public health service and a housing authority and jobs guarantees to help them from this job loss caused by full automation. They're treated as expendable under industrial capitalism to a high degree, under finance capitalism to an even higher degree, a monopoly capitalism to an even higher degree. And so the idea that just adding more of that in this particular area, this sexy fun area of intelligence automation, is going to somehow stop that trend, which has been the defining feature of financial capital. It's an absurdity. And these people are basically just selling trickle-down economics with some science fiction tropes thrown in, but making the world worse and hastening the omnicide. Another concept that's related here is extropianism, which also is promoting the use of advanced technology to create a world of abundance. It's not so different from these others. Some people would maybe take exception to that, but I'm not going to go into it. So how do we look at all of this through the cybernetic socialist insurrectionist perspective? Well, the idea of enhancing individuals and not enhancing the collective is a fundamental flaw of the transhumanists. And so much so that you can't really find any of these people who even have really any seeming humanity at all. There's no concern for the betterment of working people or the building of a humane and sustainable economic system among these people. And thus, the fact that not these subcultures, but the ideologies that these subcultures represent are predominant among the tech sectors is suggestive of a world where AI is not used for the benefit of anyone, but rather furthering instability, economic woes, and the omnicide. The risk of this technology under financial capitalism further widening the gap between rich and poor, that's a process already well underway. When you see things happening like what happened this week, where a number of European countries elected fascist leadership, that is very specifically a response to the world that these North Atlantic fascists, they were already fascists, and the U.S. Fascism have created, where this $1 trillion abomination of military-industrial, a year abomination of military-industrial complexes destroys countries just so that they can continue their monopoly capitalistic mechanisms in those countries, stealing those people's resources, creating instability and the necessity as a result of human migration. And then they blame the victims, their victims, for all of this, and harden their immigration infrastructure, so to speak. There's never in human history been a greater devil than the European and European American, as evidenced by this idea that so let's say that capitalism's climate apocalypse We do reach this point in 2029 where we have runaway overheating, but it doesn't kill everyone. We find some way to mitigate that, or some human populations are situated in such a way that we don't see full human extinction. What nevertheless is the effect of that? Well, it's what's already well in evidence. Billions of people in the global south die before the situation is, quote, under control. And when you consider that the people in the global north, light-skinned people, are the ones overwhelmingly responsible for forcing everyone into this situation in the first place, are the ones who continue to maintain these institutions. You know, why is Shell Oil still have a headquarters? Why, the materials required for you to have a Molotov cocktail cost 50 cents. Getting an affinity group together and marching on that location. This is knowing what you know about capitalism, climate apocalypse. Why is this? Why do any of these corporations and their physical infrastructure still exist? Why is there not some millions of Americans? If there were good Americans, good European Americans in this country, there would be millions of such people permanently bivouacked outside of the Pentagon, undertaking the kind of thing that I just described. They're not. There are people who are not engaging with reality, are not able to cut through their own accepted elitism, the elitist ideas that they've accepted, not able to cut through their own nihilism to take these kinds of actions. This all does come down to individualism, which is the main elitism and individualism, the main criticism of the capitalist transhumanist. It's important to have representation in these new advanced computing systems, which is why I focused so much on the building of the AI agentic class, or this LLM network work group would be highly automated based on the increasing agency of AI. You could say that AI agentic qualities are a near certainty for the consumer in open source forms in the course of 2025. This would allow for people to build an LLM network that would basically only require that you download a specially tailored open source LLM, host it on your computer, have it connected to the internet, allow it to do its job in working with other people hosting this same LLM, and then participate in this project by answering a few emails throughout the course of the day or week. That would more or less be a click-through process, answering some yes or no questions. But nevertheless, this would be the basis for developing the thing that I'm going to describe in a few minutes. What would effectively be a decentral planning paradigm on a national, global scale. The emphasis of the singularitarian, to conclude, on taking risks, disrupting, and advancing this accelerationist, pretty bad word really, accelerationist gambit is not very meaningful when these people are far-right capitalists, essentially fascists. What possible good could derive from fascists escalating in this way? This is viewed as a technological event rather than a social. Thinking about the social implications, the economic implications, that is a pretty absurd thing. As I said, by and large, the tech-minded of the West are people who have almost no humanity, and their interest in, say, changing their physical form into a transhumanist form really reflects that. They don't care about human beings. They despise human beings and want to become non-human. It's a little simplistic view of it, because I view myself as such a person who does aspire to do that, but do that in service to building a sustainable system. It's an absurd kind of a forced smile on these people's faces, an unrealistic optimism. They're telling themselves that everything's going to be okay, that some deus ex machina type event is going to occur that will save us from the undeniable ravages of capitalism's climate apocalypse. Well, I'll change gears now, but the important thing to remember is that this AI takeoff doesn't need to be a threat. It could be a tremendous opportunity for collective human endeavor, the building of a humane and sustainable economic system. But that is not possible without not just rejecting the imperialism and capitalism of these so-called techno-optimists, but also rejecting the ennui of the socialist and embracing the more insurrectionist path. Otherwise, we simply won't be able to do any of the things that we need to do to build a humane and sustainable system in the time that we have left. To talk about the thing that I alluded to moments ago, a socialist superintelligence network. This is meant to be kind of a step-by-step discussion. Both of these things in the last show are things that I promised to do. And usually when I say, oh, I'll get to this, and then I don't get to it. So this time I'm getting to it on the next show. So maybe that'll be helpful for someone who watched that last show and wanted to hear this stuff. I don't know who that person would be. I've been using, since the release, I guess in April, of Llama 3 LLMs, I've been using an offline Llama 3 LLM for a lot of my LLM writing assistant work instead of the web-based kinds that I was using before. And because of the limitations of my office setup, that means that sometimes I have a lot of writing of shows that I want to do, but it's not handy when I'm actually going to do it. It wouldn't be that hard to fix, but so I had other shows I was thinking of doing at this time, but instead I'm doing this one that I promised to do in the last show, because I was able to pull up the notes very easily. This primer for the building of this AI agentic class network. This is significant. The use of LLMs in the way that I described is significant. It's an intelligence and workforce multiplier, but if you're not operating on collectivist principles, the workforce multiplier is not going to be used correctly. So that is why a person must first and foremost become a scientific socialist before they can really become a transhumanist or cyberneticist of this kind. But if we begin to do this at large number, we can build a thing that is a governance structure that is sustainable and meeting people's needs in every land. So this AI agentic class network requires open source LLMs of a certain strength, which already exist and being rolled out as open source products to the public. And this is a continuously evolving situation. So as we begin to work on this, the modified LLM will certainly change, and probably in a short time, another advanced computing product that's not based on large language models will come to replace it. But the essential functioning of this semi-autonomous mass of computing overseen by human users, I think would probably remain in place for quite some time. And it need necessarily remain semi-autonomous, even if that is not a technical necessary, to maintain the transparency and accessibility and concern for human beings. That is, again, that fatal flaw of the transhumanists. They have virtually no concern for human beings or their welfare, even though most of them are not independently wealthy. They're not billionaires themselves, but nevertheless they are a cult of billionaire worship, who would sooner die by capitalism's climate apocalypse than relinquish their various pet elitisms. We have to have security within this network, which is a complex problem. But you can learn some ideas that are fairly consistent with this from the folks at Singularity Net, which is a project that not entirely consistent with the insurrectionist, cybernetic socialist worldview, but nevertheless, for a mainstream project, is somewhat compatible compared to most others of that kind. And there's quite a bit of material on using the blockchain to secure these kinds of projects there. I won't try to get into that too much right now. This agentic class networks infrastructure has to be able to scale to accommodate the needs of humankind, and to build this growing network and become geographically distributed outside of your immediate area, say. This is a necessary. This is basically describing an anarcho-syndicalist project, but I am not an anarcho-syndicalist. I'm a supporter of state socialism. I believe that until such time that full communism is achieved, it will be necessary to maintain state socialist forms and have those state socialist forms ardently work to replace the inferior capitalist forms. But nevertheless, I give the example of Salvador Allende building a technological planned economy in Chile between 1971 and 1973. What happened after 1973? The idea of a technological planned economy did not sit well with the fascists of the world, particularly those of the United States. So they overthrew that country to prevent what happened with the USSR, where a new form of governance inspired the world to do better things. It can't have people doing better things, according to the fascists. So they overthrew that in place, and in its place put one of the worst fascist regimes in living memory, the Pinochet dictatorship, leading to mass death in that country. But its implications are more significant because if it had been allowed to exist, it would have, I think, triggered effects like the AI takeoff much earlier, and better outcomes besides. But the point is that the reason that this network has to exist in multiple places and not have a central base of operations is not because the central base of operations itself is fundamentally flawed, but because we have to avoid this thing that fascists are very good at doing, which is destroying collectivist projects that are centered in one place. So thus the anarcho-syndicalist approach becomes strategic necessary rather than an ideological mandate. This is pretty clearly described as a form of collective decision making. It's not something that you would call democracy, but representation of the kind described by the operations of this proxy hive mind collective, that is, human beings not operating themselves as a hive mind, but having their chatbots operating as a hive mind, allows for the kind of representation that liberal supporters of liberal democracy do not actually care about, which is the economic enfranchisement of human beings. They only care about the sort of semblance of something democratic seeming, as long as the main mandate of the government and institution is to uphold financial capital and private wealth, basically to the exclusion of all those people and to their great detriment, leading to social murder of tremendous scope and scale, like the 100,000 people a year in the United States who die just from not having a public health service, for example, and 100 other examples of crimes on that same scale. Well, a little bit, I suppose, about the administrative functions of this superintelligence that would coincide with the functions of the state socialist form. The AI agentic class would be able to provide very many kinds of public health services because of being able to analyze large amounts of healthcare data, being able to predict problems such as outbreaks, and thus take action to prevent that from occurring. The overall optimizing of resource allocation is a major feature of all of these kinds of services that this agentic superintelligence could provide, facilitating vastly more preventative healthcare measures, and creating a decentralized public health service on these bases. Other important necessaries would be the decentralized housing authority, analyzing housing needs and land circumstances, identifying underutilized resources, and facilitating the development and allocation of social housing through the operations of this proxy hive mind. Again, better ensuring that basic needs are met than the current state capitalist dominions. Job and wage programs would become an important part of all of this, and so the AI agentic projects, as they grow, would be able to provide economic and job security, not just to users but to the communities that they represent, and making better use of these full automation, providing systems that would be provisioning universal basic services and income guarantees and other safety net necessaries. The transition from the imperialist and state capitalist domination to the that of this AI agentic class is not one that is very easy to describe. It's something that we're going to have to handle step by step as we go. But again, I have to state that the exigency here is being willing to take the actions of the insurrectionist to fight against these imperial and far-right powers, because we have 5 years to change this system before we are locked into this climate apocalypse death spiral. Hopefully this has been offered some insights into this possibility of decentralized governance, an adaptive system of governance. Adaptive is maybe understating it, because we're looking at the prospect here of something like AI recursion or related phenomena, where I think the system itself becomes smarter and self-improving as a matter of course, allowing for the use of resources in ways that are not being used. It's accurate to say that there are many sectors that basically don't exist or are operating so suboptimally that they might as well not exist, but could exist in this intelligence explosion. But that won't happen If the far-right neoliberals in control of these things are able to continue to dominate this, what will instead happen is there'll be some small demonstrations, relatively small demonstrations of the power of this that affects no one's quality of life. And what is really being done behind the scenes is building the billionaire class into a trillionaire class and further exacerbating the problems of economic instability and fractious dealings on an international scale and the omnicide itself. But we can get to this post-scarcity economy easily in our time if we seize these means of production, particularly the automation of intelligence and advanced computing here, and use it for efficient resource management on this collectivized basis. Hopefully this little outline of the AI agentic class potential has given you the understanding that this is an important catalyst for revolutionary social, economic, and political transformation, the kind of transformation that's necessary not in the year 2525, not at century's end, but now, before billions of people die as a result of capitalism's climate apocalypse. But we can build this just and sustainable future by learning to cooperate in these ways. I will end by saying these words that I like to say. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one, for techno-communism will win.